What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hartness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is a returning guest, whose voice you know very well from many other shows. It's Michelle Howard. And today we speak about the power dance between power and vulnerability, whether you're a facilitator or the client or participant. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you want to support the show to remain free and accessible to all, then please consider a small donation via workshops.work/support. And if you don't want to take your own notes, scroll down to the show notes to download my free one-page summary. And now, lean back to be inspired. Michelle, welcome to the show. Welcome back.
Lovely to be back. Very interested to see where we take our conversation.
Yes, and it was recently when I visited you in Australia that we realized, yes, we have recorded several podcasts together since you've been on the show. Usually you interviewing me on the topic of Never Done Before. And it was about time to, switch the microphones again and to have you as a guest, because so much has happened since our first conversation on being overdoing. So if the audience is curious about your facilitation story, they can listen back to our first interview. So I would like to start with the question, what is present for you at the moment when you look at your facilitation?
Gosh, we could take that question in so many different directions, couldn't we? I think I'm at a very interesting point in terms of my working life. So I turned 60 last year, forgetting what year I'm in. And I think it's an interesting time to reflect on what you've gathered along the way in your career and what you want to do with that is still of use. So one of the things that is present for me in my facilitation is, what are the diamonds, what are the gems that I feel like I've gathered that I would really like to share with people who are building their confidence and building their practice, so that those lessons and those experiences aren't mine alone, but are something that others can build on and unpack as is useful to them.
Sounds like
so
legacy.
That would be fun.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Sounds like legacy.
Yes.
Working on the legacy. Yeah. And just as a reminder, 60 years, how long have you been facilitating?
I started facilitating when I was 23. And I think I said when we spoke previously that was as part of a social action movement. And I was training the trainer, or did a training the trainer and then training others who were going off on a quite heated environmental action campaign. So that was my first experience of putting some structure around working with groups. And I wouldn't have called myself a facilitator then, but 23.
Yeah.
So,
and when you say gems and diamonds, what makes an experience, a facilitation experience, a diamond experience that is worth passing on because maybe the new generation can learn from it or can build on it?
Two things come to mind. One is when I learn something new about myself, and that's a constant thing. So I might see something that I need to do differently, or something I can elevate in my practice, something new I might want to adopt. So Never Done Before community has been really important for that. So when I learn something about myself, or when I see something new or a new potential in what groups can do and where groups can go and where groups are capable of. And I think particularly of the recent experience that you and I shared in a local government constituency in Australia, where we had a really large group of very emotional, quite wound up people, and being able to watch a large group of people move from wound up and anxious to what I would describe as more consolidated and hopeful. We definitely didn't resolve everything with that 200 group of people, but I think they could see some hope. They could see something new that they might share together as a group of 200 people that didn't necessarily know each other all that well. And so when I see that happen, that's like, how do we continue to build that potential? Because I think that's got really interesting lessons for humanity and, how we move people in a direction that is more about what we share than how we are different.
Yeah. And also from being, I think you used the word anxious. So how to be anxious, meaning alone, lonely, to sharing maybe hope together.
Yes.
In a recent podcast with Reese, we already shared a little bit about this experience. He was the co-facilitator with me supporting you. And what was it from your perspective? How did you design that journey to help this group of, I think there were 220 in the space?
Yes.
And because we only discussed a little bit about the arrival of them. So we picked them up, we gave them some food, made them feel heard, and give them pen and paper to share their thoughts immediately. But this all happened before the actual workshop happened. So what was your design and the learnings from it?
I think the importance of enabling people to connect and build relationship early on, which, we know as facilitators that that's critical. If we allow participants in an experience to maintain their island status, that they've come as individuals, rather than we're in the boat together somehow we're in this boat together. So if we stick with the island status, then I feel like our sessions are torn in different directions, because all people see is what they want and how that's different from someone else. But if you can start by building relationship, empathy, maybe some sense of common experience or shared experience, I think that's really powerful. And we took some time to do that with those 200 people. And then I think being honest and real so that people can see you or me, in that case, as a facilitator in my humanness, gives them the permission also to be human and maybe drop their guard a little bit. Now, that doesn't happen for everybody. And when emotions are really high, it can take a long time for the pressure cooker valve and the steam and the heat to rise and come off. But I think if people see the facilitator in their human rawness and vulnerability being true and authentic, then that gives them permission to also be the same. And then I think the third one is creating a process by which everyone is heard. And in those big meetings and big groups, it's so easy for people who are confident and powerful to dominate. And we've all been part of those experiences where, in fact, it's made us feel smaller rather than more powerful or important. Yeah. So making sure that people have that opportunity, I think, was critical in that space.
Yeah. To bring this picture to life a little bit, to underline what you just said, is we put the people into small groups at the beginning. So instead of sitting in rows, and you're very clear on that, and it wasn't maybe so easy for the politicians, for the clients in the first place to
or
accept.
Even the people who had the space, they were like, no, we always set this space up in rows. We can't possibly have people sitting in small little clusters.
Yeah.
But you're right. We put our foot down and said, well, we really want to start that way because the relationship building is important, not the everybody sitting in rows facing the front. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's great, because it shows that there is no or not the hierarchy in the sense as they are used to it, with someone in the front speaking at them, or them speaking to this person by shouting anger or asking questions, but them speaking with each other. And thereby, as you said, creating this shared experience, showing them that they're not alone, they're not an island, as you said.
Mm. And I think in that instance, people can experience some level of their own power and agency and value.
Mm.
Whereas if we had everybody sitting in rows and handing a microphone up and down the rows, then, as I said, a lot of people actually end up feeling quite small and unimportant in that sort of situation. And so they walk away from that experience not seeing themselves as part of a solution or a shared opportunity or a shared future, but still isolated.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wonder how the two opposing forces of vulnerability and courage come together in this constellation, because it's vulnerability and courage for the participants. Because I think if you're coming to such a public hearing, you think you have, as a participant, you have a very clear thing in mind. Okay, we're going to sit in rows, as you said. I will ask a question, or I will just sit and listen, but I'm rather passive. And suddenly I'm expected to become active. So that's vulnerable and needs courage. But also for you as a facilitator, as you said, you have to stand in front there and show vulnerability for yourself, but not too much, because it's not about you. And the courage to actually stand there and say, yes, I know you didn't want to sit in groups, but in rows, and we do it anyway. And then the vulnerability and courage of the client, who didn't expect this to happen and was expecting rows and answering questions. So where do you see these forces at action, and how did you learn, or what did you learn navigating them?
You're right. Those two qualities have to be there almost in equal balance, I would say. The courage and the vulnerability. It's like holding them both at the same time. And I think if I look back on my facilitation, I probably thought when I was younger that I had to be more along the courage sort of line of things and stepping in a lot more and constantly reassuring, constantly asserting, being larger in the space for people to feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I've realised is that when I do that, what I create in the group is a dependency on me to look after them and to fix things and to provide direction. If I step back a little bit and give people more agency, like the small group sort of situation, then I think the group learns to stand up for itself.
Mm-hmm.
And the important rider I would put on that is doing it in such a way that you don't perpetuate the old patterns or the old power, but doing it in such a way that people see new potential relationships, what they can learn from each other, not just what they know themselves.
Yeah. And this really highlights how what's in for them from the perspective of the participants. What about the client?
Yeah. Isn't it interesting? I was thinking about this earlier today about how often we get asked to facilitate when the client, and that could be someone internal, like a manager who's feeling out of their depth, or, in our case, it was an elected body that wanted to hear from its community. But when people are feeling out of their depth, and so what they are often looking for is something safe because they're worried that things will go wrong, which makes it really hard then to say, I actually want you to take more risk rather than less risk. Because if we don't take a risk here, we're just going to perpetuate the existing power dynamics, the existing conversations, the existing assumptions, all of that sort of thing. If we want to shake that up and get a different outcome, then we've got to take a different approach, which involves some risk. And so I think that's a really important conversation, is like the risk trade-off that you have with a client.
And what I hear is that risk is interchangeable with control, or the lack of it. So taking risk means giving up control and opening it up to the participants and to the potential unknown.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
And the more control we let go, the more opportunity we have for emergence. But yeah.
Yes. And look, I think many people would have been in a situation where, they're almost handed, I don't want to say handed a script, but handed a process that the client wants to see enacted.
Mm-hmm.
And they think they need a facilitator to enact that for them. Whereas the skill that we all have or we develop is actually that process, the process design that enables something different to happen.
Yeah. And then I think the trust in participants and clients that what they're bringing to the space is good enough and adds value. Because I think one of the magic moves was to ask participants of the previous workshops to represent the group and share their perspective and their outcomes on stage in front of the 200. And their courage and vulnerability was then really showing what has happened before and got the buy-in from the others.
And that strategy relates to the client's direct objective, which was to hear from community about what is important to them. Now, you could translate that to an organisation to hear from our employees about what is important to them. Yeah. And so it's holding clients true to their objectives, which enables us to maybe take some of those risks, because I find often there will be a mismatch between what the client says they want to achieve and then what they say they want to happen when people get in the room, And it's like, well, if you go down that path of, presenting to people for 30 minutes and then asking them for feedback, that would be a common example, then you're actually not giving the opportunity for people to voice where they are coming from. So it's actually holding clients accountable to what they want to do. And us as facilitators, coming back to your point, having the courage to do that, and also making ourselves vulnerable that if the client turns around and says, actually, no, that's a no-go zone for me, then do we still want to do that work? Can we still do a good job?
Yeah. What I hear is that in order to do, air quotes, the good job, it actually requires the inclusion of the participants of the groups and to give them the opportunity to add context.
Yes.
Because it's not just the reaction to a specific content in that moment, but acknowledging what has happened before.
Yeah. Yeah.
The story, where are we coming from?
And part of that, I think, is supporting clients or sponsors to think about the success of the process, not just from their own perspective, but what does success look like for the people who step into the room? What do they need to get from this? And so that the process design becomes or is informed by that broader range of needs and expectations, not just what the client or the sponsor wants.
Yeah.
So sometimes as a facilitator, I'm there to make sure that those different needs are given voice.
Yeah. Do you think that it's a general recipe for a workshop that we need to keep in mind that the workshop or the time we're spending together, it's not an island? And that in order to make it successful, we have to basically build a bridge from the past to the present and then an outlook into the future.
Yes. And I'm realistic about what, as a facilitator, I have influence and control over. Yeah. And so I've got pretty much no influence or control over what people experience before they get into the room. I mean, I can influence the kind of invitation. I can support people who might need some preparation or some capacity building to participate. So I often think of, people, young people, for example. If I want young people to participate, they need often some prior work before they come into the room. But generally, there's not a lot prior that we can influence. And after, people will move out of our sessions and take what we've done together in all sorts of different directions and ways. So what's the opportunity to close the loop or bring that back? So I guess I just want to be mindful that sometimes we overstretch, I think, what we think we can achieve, particularly if we're with people for 90 minutes or 2 hours,
Yeah.
What's realistic for my capacity to influence in that period of time?
It's interesting because I didn't even have the influence in mind when I asked the question, but it's an important edge, of course. I was rather thinking to pick everyone up. So instead of influencing the past and the future, giving them opportunity to share and to bring into the space that something has happened prior.
Yes.
That everyone has a story, and there's a reason why everyone has decided to spend their time and energy and attention in the space together, as opposed to a million other opportunities competing with it.
And that's why, one of my, I'm just going to be bold and say it's a non-negotiable kind of ground rule, is that respect for each other and the respect for diversity. And I will voice that before we start exactly what you've just said, which is everybody brings something different, which is of value. Our job is to bring that out of one another and to honour that and to look at how it can add value to the work that we're going to do together.
And how do we make sure that this doesn't seem like just another buzzword, the respect?
I think reminding people of how they like to be treated and what they need to feel heard and respected, and offering or showing that to others. Yeah. Because I can't imagine that there would be anyone in a room that would have 100% successful experience of being in groups. Everybody will at some time have had a negative experience and not want that for themselves again, and hopefully not want that for others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So relating it to themselves, reminding them. And I remember one thing that you did in this same workshop that we just talked about was giving examples of just by observing what has happened in the space while everyone arrived. I think someone made space for a participant in a wheelchair. Another one helped someone who was in crutches, or giving children some cookies. So pointing out small examples that show, okay, so this is already happening, and how can we do more of that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting tactic. A, to reinforce the behaviour that you want to see, and to show that and to do that yourself. Yeah. And then B, to encourage others to model that for one another, so that the leadership, if you like, and I'll sort of do that in quotation marks, the leadership of the group isn't just coming from me, but it's coming from the other participants. Here's a behaviour that I'm demonstrating by, making sure this woman with kids feels comfortable to participate, that I think others could then also model that. And it starts to then water down some of the difficult behaviour, because suddenly that stands out in a different way. The people who are sitting with their arms crossed and grumpy and won't move their chair, suddenly they look a bit strange because other people are happily doing that to accommodate someone else.
Yeah. How do you react then to those who decide not to move, or to even move their chairs back into rows?
All I can do is invite. And if people don't want to do that, then the choice is with them. And I've, in the past, had some situations where people have, totally refused to participate in something that is going on. And then I think my responsibility is to honour the group and the way that the group is moving. And for those individuals that decide that isn't for them, to create an alternative. Well, maybe you would like to have a different conversation if this conversation isn't working for you. And please feel free to go outside and grab a coffee and talk to one another. And I'll let you know when we're done with this bit, and then you might want to come back in and join us. So I think we can't force people. That's not our job. We can only invite.
And what I love about the strategy, that it's basically a Trojan horse back into group work. So you invite those who didn't want to work in groups to work as a group. So to have a conversation as a non-group.
As a non-group. Yeah, you go be a non-group together.
And by that, so they can sit there and wait, obviously, or they can have a conversation with it. It's basically, a sort of group work, but in a different form. And thereby I could imagine creating, they can get some extra steam off, but also see, okay, we are not alone.
Yeah.
And thereby feeling maybe more comfortable and more trusting with the space, and more open maybe to listen to others, hopefully afterwards.
And look, I want to highlight there's a danger in that if that separate conversation isn't facilitated in any way, that it can become a bit of a parallel plot to what is going on. Yeah. So when I've done that, I would usually offer that group its own facilitator so that there is someone with them that has a skill set to help them to move out of their funk, if possible, to a different place rather than just spiral down into something that is more and more destructive. Yeah.
Yeah. And what just comes to my mind is I was thinking of the situation in the equivalent in an online space.
Yes.
Where those who don't want to go into breakout rooms, maybe they want to stay in the main room or don't want to participate. And I think there are two strategies. Either you create a breakout room for those who don't want to be in a breakout room, and they can either talk to each other or grab a coffee and do whatever they want, or you can leave them in the main room. But then the danger is that they will start venting or asking their questions or disrupting, and thereby basically spoiling the atmosphere and the energy of the facilitator. How do you see the situation? Is it an equivalent? How would you deal with that?
Yeah. So I just want to take it back again to the way that we set sessions up in the first place. And so I will often make a comment in relation to the design of the process and how it has been done to realise the purpose of the session, and that I am inviting people to trust in the process to get us there. And I will keep coming back to that. I will often explain why we're doing something, because I think that it's a bit like if I had a doctor or a surgeon operating on me, I have to show some trust for their skill set. And, I wouldn't want to interrupt partway through the surgery and go, oh, actually, could you put that bit back? I don't know that I feel comfortable about that. So it's how do we invite that trust in the process from the get-go? So I think that's important there. And coming back to your example of if people are uncomfortable about what they're being asked to do, I actually would seek to understand why. Like, why isn't this feeling like the right thing for you? And, the reason we've gone into breakout rooms is so that you can learn from one another's experience, for example, whatever the actual reason is. Can you help me to understand why that isn't something that feels comfortable for you, and how it is that you might like to, learn from others' experience or share experience with the group? And it might be that they say, look, I'm actually just feeling all talked out. We've done 5 lots of breakout rooms already today, and I just need some time to myself. Maybe I say, that's great. Do you want to spend some time writing quietly? What's the experience that you've got in relation to this? What would you like to share with others? And when we come back, I'm really happy to hear from you. So I guess it's setting it up and then understanding in the individual perspective.
Yeah. And then just also respecting that they have a different view or different expectations when coming to the space. Because I think for a town hall meeting, when they expect to get answers, and it's a reply that I remember from the session. I didn't come here to talk to my peers. I'm not interested in their experience. I want to hear answers to my questions. And then I think it's sad but valid if someone doesn't want to talk to their peers. But then I wonder, how can we get them? Because I think everyone, once they realize that it's actually nice to talk to peers, would benefit from it.
And in that particular situation, and it, often might be so, we don't have all the answers, So it's difficult, isn't it, being upfront about that and going, look, I understand that some people might feel some urgency about needing answers to questions about the restructure in this organisation or whatever the particular topic is. We don't have all of those answers today. Yeah? But what we can do is understand what you're curious about or concerned about in relation to this proposed change. And then if we can't resolve that tonight or give you an answer that's satisfying today, then let's make a commitment to get back to you when we do know the answer, which is what we did in our session that we ran together. And I think that's actually reasonable because often we don't have the certainty.
Yeah, true. And then it might also convince them that there might not be all the answers, and the peers certainly don't have the answers, but they might have lived through similar experiences already and might be able to share best practices or coping mechanisms.
Yeah. And I think one of the advantages that comes out of those conversations with peers, if coming back to the point we made, is people very often get a sense that they're not alone. So the thing that concerns them also concerns other people, or they may be with somebody who can see a way forward in relation to their concern. So I might be concerned that I've got no certainty around my new job description. Somebody's just told me I'm going to be moving jobs. I've got no, and for someone else to go, oh, actually, I know that they are being developed. We're going to get those next week.
Yeah.
So sometimes people can help to allay the fears or to respond to the questions. Yeah.
And maybe I'm making this up, but what just appeared in my mind was that there are different personalities in a way that some feel grateful to realize, oh, I'm not alone with my fear. And we can do this together since we are not alone. We are a peer group, and then everything will be fine. And others arrive with the perception that my case is very special. So this might be the case for you, and you might be in that situation, but in my situation, and I think these are the ones that are actually not interested in the peer conversation. And I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know what kind of belief system they're protecting, but what would be the coping mechanism to get them back into the group?
And again, I'm not a psychologist either, but experience shows me with people like that very often comes from a place of not being heard and not being valued. So the need to tell somebody how different my situation is or how special I am comes from a sense of powerlessness over what's happened in the past. I wasn't heard, or I said what I needed to say, but nothing changed. I was made to feel very small in a hierarchical situation. So, you really need to hear me now.
Yes, yes, makes so much sense.
Yeah. And so, again, with those people, I think it is giving them, and often they do need more space, so giving them space to get that out rather than to just keep putting a lid on it. So giving them the space to get that out. And sometimes that means also some one-on-one time with either yourself or somebody who does know, so that there's that eyeball moment where people can get that they are valued and can get that they are heard, not just they're spouting something out into a room of however many other people and it just evaporates into the ether.
Yeah. Which now brings to mind the importance to have a co-facilitator, or in the case of a town hall, not only one person who can answer questions, but an entire team. Because then it might make sense to just separate this person from the group, to create a breakout room for them, to have maybe another, not the key person on stage to answer the question, but someone else to say, okay, we listen to you.
Yes.
Without distracting or hijacking the entire session.
Yeah. And that's something that I'm kind of prompted to think about when you say that is, again, we've all as facilitators been in a situation where a particular individual starts sucking a whole lot of oxygen from the group for whatever reason. And it's that really difficult balance between giving them enough attention and enough space and enough power that they don't feel that we've kept making them small, but not doing that in such a way that the rest of the group starts to feel that that's the only person that you care about.
Yeah.
And that to get the attention of the facilitator, I've got to act out and be demanding.
True, because then it's like, it gets all these children syndromes out.
Yes.
If
So I want
loud
people.
Enough.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. If I yell out loud enough, you'll give me a lolly too. You'll give me special attention. So I want people to know that I will listen to them and they will be heard. And I also want the group to know that I'm there for every one of them, not just the people who want to demand my attention.
Yes. And something else that just crossed my mind based on a story that we shared on the podcast about a online town hall, they said, and the best practice of not censoring any question or comment. So also to read out or give space to those who highly criticize. And like, yes, it's maybe my first idea, we can put them apart and give them all the attention. But then it could also seem to the other group, to the rest of the group, that it was a censorship and doesn't want to hear the complaints or the negative sides. So it's a very slippery slope.
Yeah. And I will often use the approach, I'm thinking of situations where people constantly complain about the past and how things have been done, and that starts to undermine people's trust in what's happening now. Because we did such a terrible job in the past, we couldn't possibly do any better because we're still as bad as we were before, that kind of thing. That it's often important to name that and to say, I'm really sorry that you had that experience previously. And I can hear that must have been really frustrating for you. I want to commit to you that this is not how we're going to be now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I can't fix what happened previously, but I can commit to doing things differently. So, for example, making sure that everybody feels heard.
Yeah. Thank you for framing that. And I'm just wondering whether there are new ways to acknowledge that and to say it, because I have the impression that many already feel the tickle of discomfort as soon as they hear the acknowledgement of someone's experience. I hear you. I feel for you. And then they feel, don't talk to me like a coach. And don't talk to me like I was a child who doesn't understand. But I think...
it's sort of, it comes back to what are the assumptions that people bring into the space. And if one of those assumptions is, I'm not going to be looked after, I'm going to be spoken down to, the person running the show is going to think that they are somehow more important and more expert than me, but I've been living this or doing this or in this job for however long. If people bring that lens, then absolutely I can see what you're saying. So I think it's how it is said. And again, coming back to the courage and vulnerability, it's got to be balanced with not just a pat on the head kind of paternalism, but a vulnerability that, things can go wrong. I accept that. I've, experienced that myself. And I'm going to do my best to deal with those particular things or issues in our experience here together now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like what you're saying, that to keep in mind what the lens is they're coming in with. And then everything that we do becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy to them. And how can we break that pattern, basically? So if they are coming in with the expectation that everything we say will come from the place, as you described, us talking down to them, not giving them space and time to share, then how can we maybe create micro moments to already show them the opposite?
Yeah. And I think too, it is about coming back to that balance between courage and vulnerability. It's like the consequence of being an over permissive parent where everything is okay, or the flip side of that, a controlling parent where pretty much nothing is okay. We need to make sure that we are treating people with respect, adults, and I'm just going to assume that we're working with adults and what we're talking about, but human beings with experience, with agency, with knowledge, with feelings, with all of those things. And once we come from that particular perspective, then I think we facilitate from a human place rather than I'm here to control you or tell you what is right or wrong, or the other side of it, the permissive parent, I'm here to keep everybody happy and make sure that everything is okay. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Totally. And the second one, ironically, then they make it all about themselves.
Yes.
So I'm here to make everyone happy because this is what makes me feel good and fulfilled. And
I absolutely know I can't do that. I can't make everybody happy. That's not going to be the experience. I can treat them with respect. I can be honest about what we're doing. I can do my best to make sure that people are heard and engaged. I can make sure that we're transparent about information and what's going on. Those are all the things that I can do. But in the end, is everybody going to be happy? Highly unlikely.
And I think that's maybe the biggest lesson to learn as a facilitator, that we cannot make everyone happy and it's not our job. And I think still for many years, we try and have the silent hope because the desire to please and to be accepted and to belong is just so strong.
And it reminds me of something that I attended a World Open Space in San Francisco years ago. And I remember getting really upset when we were talking about what we wanted to achieve through our facilitation. And I said, I really want to make a difference. And this woman turned around to me and she said, you'll never make a difference until you let go of making a difference. And I think it relates back, we can translate that back to this idea of we'll never make everybody happy until we let go of that expectation that we have to make everybody happy.
Yeah.
So, the more we can just come from a place of genuinely doing an authentic, open, diligent job, the more likely we are that people will feel a level of satisfaction at the end. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, ironically, I have the impression the less we try to make everyone happy, the more we might actually succeed, because everyone will find their place, or at least permission to do them. Because if I do me, you can do you.
Yes. Yeah.
As long as we come from a place of care and generosity and obviously. So we want to do a good job in guiding groups. And
take that responsibility for everyone's experience seriously. Yeah.
And yes, the responsibility makes me think that by wanting everyone to be happy and to create this experience, I think there's also the danger that we put the responsibility on the group and the individuals, that they have to enjoy it in order to please us. And I think it depends on the personality and the energy of the facilitator. But if it's someone with strong energy and maybe authority, then participants can feel like, I need to make this person happy. I need to follow their rules and guidelines. And then it can be quite manipulative. Yes.
And I also think too that and if I use the term satisfaction rather than happiness, but what satisfaction looks like, what a good experience looks like, can vary from, between cultures, between individuals. And so the idea that we need to, constantly lift the energy and have everybody kind of engaged and up and, having a wow of a time, that seems to me unrealistic. But it also seems to me a bit ignorant of the fact that people do go on an emotional journey and an energy level journey throughout the course of anything that we are doing with them, which means that there'll be ebb and flow in the way that people feel at different times. What probably is important is that at the end of a session or whatever the interaction is, that people can look back on that journey and feel like we've honoured the things that we started out to do together. Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I was just thinking that it's something that I've learned through NDB, this global community where we all join from different time zones and different cultural backgrounds and also theoretical backgrounds when it comes to facilitation, that I had to learn the hard lesson that I'm not in control of other people's experiences. I think you remember these times where I tried so hard because I thought that I know how workshops or experiences must look like, until I realized that no, if someone joins from in the morning or in the evening with a coffee or a gin and tonic is a very different experience. and some enjoy the silent reflection more, and others need more time doing stuff with their bodies, and it's not on us.
And so therefore, coming back to what we can control is creating an experience which welcomes or embraces or gives permission for that diversity of emotional energy, needs, learning styles, all the things that we know. And I think, that's actually quite challenging, because coming back to control, perhaps particularly people who are earlier in their facilitation journey, their safety net is control. And so creating a process that has harder boundaries and is straight up and down and much more tightly timed. And so if something isn't working because the energy level is different, they don't have something else to pull out of their back pocket to use. So I think what I feel I've learnt over time is the ability to work more with what is in the room. We talk about improvisation all the time, and rather than the rigidity that perhaps somebody earlier in their practice might have.
Yeah. Can you give an example?
Yes. Let me give the example of co-facilitating an NDB workshop with Kate, where we actually deliberately planned very little, because we wanted to make ourselves deal with what turned up. And so we experimented with what was the minimum that we needed to provide to create an experience that a group might feel comfortable with. And so clear purpose was one of those things. Curious, honest questions, so asking of the group what they needed and then being able to go with that. And a real, as co-facilitators, honesty and transparency with each other. And that might look something like me saying, Miriam, I'm hearing that the group wants to spend some time on X, Y, Z, and I'm thinking we might do this. Are you okay with that? So actually voicing the process design in the session, but doing that in such a way that the group didn't feel like they weren't being looked after, but just, in fact, that they were being heard, and it was a really bespoke process responding to what they needed.
Beautiful example, because it also, it shows that gives the participants, the group, the feeling that they're looked after, without giving them the feeling that there is no process or that it's out of control. Because I think that very often co-facilitators wouldn't speak to each other in front of the group in order to avoid anyone to think that they're not in control or they don't know what to do. Although, in fact, I think it's a nice gesture as long as it's really short and precise, kind of an update or an instruction or a request, instead of pretending that as co-facilitators we can read each other's minds and then assuming that we can have an eye on the chat, on the group, and the private WhatsApp.
Yes.
Same time.
Yes. But you're actually bringing me back to the question that we started with, which is what's coming up for me now in my facilitation. And I guess what I want to voice is I'm playing now a lot with what's the minimum that's required for us to do a good job. And partly that comes from that I think if we look back at where facilitation has come from and the essence of facilitation, the group and the needs of the group and the purpose of the group should always be at the centre of what we do. And I don't know whether it's a curiosity or a concern, that particularly with online facilitation, we've become quite seduced by or tangled up in lots of tools and tricks and funky stuff, which sometimes can be really fun. But I also wonder the extent to which it serves the group or the extent to which it just makes it really fun and exciting for the facilitator to be doing something different and to look like they, know all these different approaches. So that's definitely something that is present for me, is what's the essence of what we do and how can we keep coming back to that so that we don't get distracted by doing things for the sake of it.
Yeah. Beautiful question and quest.
Mm-hmm.
And also, what is how much responsibility can the group and the participants take on the success of the session and guiding it towards the purpose? And how much guidance is required by the facilitator?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think sometimes if we put too much responsibility on the group, requesting them to voice what they need or what they want can also be paralyzing.
Yes, I would agree.
If we do it,
and that's another one of those delicate balance things. And I almost always avoid asking the group to design the session while we're in it, if that makes sense. So I will give people choices like, well, do you want to keep continuing this conversation as a whole group, or would you like to have some more intimate discussions with maybe 2 or 3 other people? I will give people choice. But I won't kind of throw the whole thing up in the air and kind of co-design it with people while I'm going.
Yeah. What remains your number one facilitation challenge?
Can I have 2?
Sure. Or 3?
One probably still is trusting my intuition and coming back to what we said before, when people have different needs, different experiences. I was relaying to you something earlier about, people in the same workshop but having completely different sets of feedback about it. One saying we needed more time in groups and the other one saying, something completely different. So trusting my intuition about the way to go that will best serve the interests of the groups as a whole, I think that's always a challenge. And then probably, I think the other one, as someone now in my 60s, is how do I stay kind of current and fresh and up to date and not fall into the trap of tricking up my facilitation just because other people are doing it, but using things that will serve the process and serve me. So, staying fresh and up to date and continuing to stretch myself and not doing that just because it's a good thing to do.
And how do you do that?
Well, I feel like I can do an NDB ad here and say having a good community of peers that challenge me and, model different ways of doing and being is a great way of doing that. And I also have made a promise to myself that every session I run, I will take a risk. So if I look at the process that I've planned and I think, gosh, I'm doing exactly the same as I did last time, then I will make myself find an improvement or something else that is new to do.
And risky then means that you are unsure about the outcome, or it takes a little bit more responsibility. It takes away a little bit of control.
Yes. It adds an unknown that I need to manage. But I don't, again, it's not about doing that just because, I want to run the extra mile. It's about doing it because I think, wow, actually, that might give us a better outcome. That might create better relationship, better decisions, might make things stick. Whatever.
Yeah. And I think also, I love the challenge with the taking a risk. I love that. And I have the impression that co-facilitating also always helps to keep fresh without overdoing it. Because if you're co-designing a session with someone, you have to explain why you want to use a special tool, especially if they don't know it. If you don't have a good answer, ditch it.
Yes. I absolutely agree. And again, finding people to work with that will stretch you in that way, and also where you have respect for each other's strength, boundaries, knowledge, etc. That's special.
Yeah. And to see just how someone else is designing and guiding what they bring in. And I think in co-facilitated session, at least that's how I approach it, I have a tendency to go back to the minimum, just to minimize coordination and improve the smoothness of the session, because you already have two people to align.
And I think it creates that exciting opportunity too, that because everybody has different strengths, that it will take the session in different ways. And I'm just, thinking out loud here, that I probably would choose not to co-facilitate with somebody who is exactly like me, because I want that mosaic of the different approaches, different experiences, different strengths.
Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. What makes a workshop fail for you?
If I'm not exercising that intuition in relation to what the group needs, and I just put my blinkers on and push towards an outcome, regardless of what the group is telling me. And that I don't mean necessarily voicing that. Yeah. Like a racehorse, when the racehorses have those blinkers on and they're just heading for the finish line.
Yeah. Which then also brings back the intuition. So how can you, because I think your intuition tells you that's something that you have to adjust and that you cannot just continue with your plan and program if the group tells you differently. But then somehow with stress or insecurity, we forget to listen to this intuition.
And coming back to your point about courage and vulnerability, also having that balance of courage and vulnerability to ask if something is working. Yeah. And to then listen to what the group says. And again, not to be beholden and be asking people to redesign our process for us, but to listen to how it is working for people and what that might mean for what we need to do next.
Yeah.
It's like the improv principle of being affected.
And I think the moment we really genuinely acknowledge that everyone has a different perspective and experience, which has nothing to do with us, then we can also hear this feedback, what's working, what's not working for them, without judgment and without becoming defensive.
Yes. And it doesn't mean that the feedback doesn't mean we're doing a bad job. Yeah.
Because I think that might be one reason why we or many facilitators hold back in asking the group for feedback or whether it works. It's the danger that they say, that they confirm and say it doesn't work, we need to shift gears or do something else. Or the feeling of having failed the group, having failed the process.
And what I want to observe in what you've just said, if we ask people and maybe it was the way I phrased it before, is this working for you? That is way too open a question, yeah, because that's when those previous lenses and experience come in.
Mm-hmm.
But if we say, is this helping you to reach a decision together? Where we're actually targeting what the task or the purpose is at the time. Is this helping you to understand the impact of this change in the organisation?
Yes.
Yeah, so we're actually taking it back to what we're doing rather than all of those other needs, and mother issues or whatever else people are carrying.
Yeah. Because, okay, so is this working for you? Yeah. Does not necessarily refer to the purpose of why we're here or the goal of the session. Yes. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Would you choose a conversation?
Yeah. Unexpected and juicy. And thank you for your listening and your curiosity.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you would have shared with the audience that we didn't touch upon?
I think one of the things that we've alluded to, which I know is important to me in relation to facilitation, is the notion of power. And we've alluded to that and creating experiences where people can be in touch with their own agency and power and control without that becoming a competitive or counterproductive thing. And I think for me, that goes back to a question that I have about when we use the term facilitator and facilitation, are we aware that the history of facilitation is actually about creating experiences or group processes that do challenge assumptions around power and control? That prior to, people talking about facilitation, which came out of the social change movement, when people stepped into a room to run a group, they would chair a meeting. That was the paradigm that people operated on, is, the men in suits on a long table with somebody at the front with an agenda with times on it moving through, and, any other business, raise hands down. So facilitation really has come from a place of challenging the power. And so coming back to the points that we've made in this conversation about working with our clients, working with participants, I think that lens on power and that understanding of how power is operating is really important.
Yeah. Thank you for pointing this out. Do you think that facilitation is always about shifting power dynamics?
I think it's about shifting the status quo. Yeah. Because if things were working and the status quo needed to be maintained, maybe they don't need facilitation. Maybe the group, in fact, could just hang out for a bit and have a conversation and make a decision together. But if something needs to be done differently or shaken up, then you need somebody to come in that is independent of what's going on to hold the space for that to happen.
Yeah, because, I think even with the conversation, with the topics we touched upon in the beginning, with different personality types, with the seating, it's always about democratizing, giving voice and power to those who are usually not heard, to redistributing power from those who have institutional power to those who don't.
And if I just want to tell people that I've made a decision, I don't need a facilitator.
Yeah.
But if I want to use that phrase, harness the wisdom of the group to help me to make a better decision or get somewhere different, then I do need a facilitator, because there's a real craft in challenging that status quo in a way that people experience some uncertainty and change and feel safe about doing that.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you, Michelle. It's always bliss and inspiration to speak to you.
Mutual, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for staying tuned and for listening until the very end. I hope that you found the inspiration and the wisdom that you are looking for, And I hope that you will subscribe to the show so that you never miss any of the interviews with another inspiring facilitator from across the world. I'm devoted to continue this podcast and to deliver weekly an episode that maintains the quality that you expect and you deserve. And if you would like to help me to maintain this quality and to keep the podcast free, please help us. Visit workshops.work/support to make a small donation to keep the podcast free. Thank you so much. I hope to be in your ears next week.